Hello, everyone. Folks are coming in. See if folks connecting. We'll give everybody a minute to come in and get connected.
How are you doing this evening?
Good, thank you. How are you all?
We're doing good. I'll see you next month.
Excellent, excellent. We love to
I'm
hear.
coming with the Civil War Museum for a visit.
Excellent. That'll be great. Well, as people keep coming in and getting connected, I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Mary Furlong Minkoff. I am a board member of the Orange County African American Historical Society, and I am also the Assistant Director of the Archaeology Department and the Curator of Archaeological Collections at James Madison's Montpelier. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel for you as part of our annual Juneteenth celebration held this year in partnership between OCAHS, the Montpelier Foundation, the Montpelier Descendants Committee, and the Art Center in Orange. So we are really excited. This is the third in our series of virtual panel discussions, all taking different approaches to celebrating stories of freedom, which is this year's theme for Juneteenth. And we're also about to kick off our in-person celebrations. We will be celebrating in person Friday evening with a Descendants dinner, all day Saturday at a giant public event at Montpelier with music and food and vendors and art and community groups and lots of amazing special tours. And we'll be continuing the celebration on Monday in downtown Orange in Church Street Park, which is at the corner of Church and Chapman Streets. It will be an amazing event with lots of local musicians, community organizations, group set up, and I got confirmation today for the food trucks and a bounce house for Monday. So bring the little ones in to town for that. Let's see. Oh, the registration was link was wrong on one of the emails I sent out. So I'm sorry for that. But we have about 100 people registered, so hopefully we will be good. So I wanted to go ahead and get started with our program tonight. Our program tonight is called part of our celebration, Celebrating Stories of Freedom series, and this one is Stories from Our Community. Stories from Our Community is a discussion about how local historians and keepers of community history work to uncover the history about how Black communities have worked towards freedom. And we particularly are focusing again, of course, on Virginia and the local area. We have an amazing panel today, and I would like to introduce you to all of them. Our first panelist is Nia Bates. Nia is a PhD candidate in the Department of History and Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. She studies 19th and 20th century US history, global environmentalism, and rural cultural landscapes. For the past 5 years, Nia has worked in public history, preserving rural African American community history in Central Virginia. In that time, she also served as the director for the African American History and Getting the Word African American Oral History Project at Monticello. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Guardian, CBS, on the Today Show, NBC, PBS NewsHour, ESPN, and Black Perspectives. You may have heard of some of those places. Nia has been a guest on several podcasts and streaming platforms, including Oprah's Book Club, Monty Don's American Gardens, NPR's All Things Considered, Sporkful with Dan Pashman, and Following Harriet. She earned a BA in African and African American Studies and an MA in Architectural History with a certificate in Historic Preservation from the University of Virginia. She was born and raised in Central Virginia and is a descendant of several families who were enslaved in that area, and particularly here in Orange County. Nia, we're really excited to have you here and back doing a Juneteenth program with us. Our next panelist is Jennifer Hurst-Widner. She's the Executive Director of Historic Germanna. Jennifer has over 15 years of experience working with historic sites. She came to the Germanna Foundation from Preservation Virginia, where she was the Director of Museum Operations and Education. She serves on multiple DEAI task force and has managed NEH grants, which is the National Endowment for the Humanities, including researching enslaved craftspeople, and NAGPRA consultation, which is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, for those of you who don't know the acronyms. Consultation and documentation projects. She helped launch Preservation Virginia's Voices Remembered Descendants Portal Project, and as a member of the International Coalition of the Sites of Conscience, and participated in their Community Resilience Program. She was the Community Trust Building Fellow in 2018, and in 2017, she spoke at the Carolina Lowcountry and Atlantic World Conference at Mother Emanuel AME, and hosted and was a symposium speaker with the Slave Dwelling Project. Her exhibit highlights include They Left Their Mark, Bacon's Castle Orientation Exhibition, Keeper of the Light, Willis Augustus Hodges Digital Story Maps, The Legacy of Patrick Henry, Liberty, Human Rights, and Revolution, Scotchtown, People, Place, and Preservation, Richmond Justice, which was a series of portraits and stories of individuals shaped by the justice system and performing statistics, Art 180s, and Legal Aid Justice Center's collaborative project, a virtual reality exhibition spotlighting the incarcerated teens and their artwork. So we're really excited to have Jennifer here today. Our next panelist is James Bruce Monroe, who was raised in Orange County, Virginia, in the Freedmen's community of Little Petersburg. He attended Orange County Public Schools, graduating from Orange County High, and received an associate's degree in business from Piedmont Virginia Community College. He volunteered service with the United States Air Force during the Vietnam era and spent more than 30 years in aircraft maintenance, retiring at the rank of Senior Master Sergeant. He was also employed by the U.S. Department of Defense as an aircraft maintenance supervisor, managing the inspection program for tactical aircraft assigned to the 192nd Fighter Group, Virginia Air National Guard, until his retirement in 2005. Since retirement, James has served the Orange, Virginia community as Political Action Committee Chairman of the Orange County NAACP. He's a lifetime member of the Bethel Baptist Church of Orange, where he serves as a trustee and a deacon. And he is now serving as the president of the Orange County African American Historical Society and is a proud member of the Montpelier Descendants Committee. We're so excited to have you here. Alexis is our next panelist. She is a National Park Service archaeologist at Petersburg National Battlefield. She graduated from Howard University with her BA and from Syracuse University with her MA in anthropology, specializing in African American archaeology, focusing on cultural landscapes and historic preservation. She is the project director of the Enslaved Field Laborers Project, EFLP. The EFLP offers an opportunity to better understand and interpret the daily life and experiences of African American women, men, and families who lived in the field quarters of White Hill Plantation during the 1800s. The EFLP is interested in examining how enslaved people created homes and families, asserted their humanity with dignity, and sought to survive and resist the institution of slavery. The project is currently engaging community members in its interpretive process through a collaborative Black heritage signage throughout the city of Petersburg. Furthermore, the park is hosting its first Urban Archaeology Core program, which will focus on drawing connections to Black people's connection to agriculture in the area from the 19th century to the present. Using archaeology as a vehicle for civic engagement and park stewardship, the program will explore how the past has an impact on the present. So I am so excited to have you all here. I think this is going to be a really amazing panel, and I really appreciate you all in the audience that are here today as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This conversation, as I've said before, is part of this year's Juneteenth celebration. But even though we know that Juneteenth is now a federal holiday, we also know that here in Virginia and across the country, African American people did not just wait to be told that they were free. They did everyday acts in their life over centuries to assert and obtain that freedom. So I was just wondering if each of you could share a story through the research you've done, your community engagement, or through your own knowledge about how folks here in Virginia work towards their freedom or the freedom of others. And Naya, you're my first block, so I'm going to go to you first.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks for pulling all of us together. I feel so fortunate to be on a panel with everyone who is assembled here tonight. Yeah, I guess one of the short stories that I'll share is from my current dissertation work, which focuses on the role of free Black settlements along the Underground Railroad between Central Virginia and Ohio. And I think time and time again, what is so impressive to me about these communities is that the enslaved people who tapped into the Underground Railroad network, those who sought their own freedom before the legal end of slavery, had to have command of a vast network of spaces. And so these enslaved individuals are tapping into their knowledge of Virginia geography, of the waterways, of different types of landscapes. So whether that's the mountainous terrain of the Shenandoah Valley, or if that's the Central Virginia Piedmont, or perhaps it's the landscapes that exist in Southern Ohio. And so, impressive to me are the stories of escape that really highlight that they understood this landscape better than their enslavers and better than the patrollers who were trying to capture them. So one of the sources I've been working with this week actually is a 1930s newspaper transcription that has a lot of first-person accounts of the underground from these individuals who escaped. And one of the examples is an enslaved man who escaped from Virginia, and it took him 352 days to make it to Southern Ohio. And along the way, he describes what that experience was like, that he's, running in the woods, that they're surviving by eating feral hogs and other things along the way. And then he disappears while crossing the Ohio River. So the patrollers who were hot on his heels got lost. And the newspaper actually transcribes the description from the patroller. And the patroller says that they're following this person across the river and they turned a bend in the river, the Ohio River being the river that I'm describing, and that this man just disappeared into thin air, into an orchard. And so those are the stories that I find really, really fascinating. Or that's one story that I find fascinating. Mary,
that's amazing, Naya. I really appreciate that story, and to think about almost an entire year, 352 days, you said. That's really powerful. Thank you. Bruce, I'll go to you next. You're sort of next in my lineup.
Okay, I'm very glad to be here with this fine group of panelists also, and I thank you so much for inviting me to participate. First comes to mind is escape. There's not too many records locally of any particular situation other than what I know from Montpelier. And the escaped slave's name was Anthony. And he escaped, captured, and then the next day he escaped again, never to be seen again. And me knowing this area and the nature of the people in this area, I think that was pretty much a common occurrence. Also, there were acts of resistance. Slaves would sabotage equipment. They would also fake sickness. Sometimes they would even work and earn money and purchase their freedom. I believe they used legal action. But most of all, I think that it was the community support that came together, and the pressure of that community is what helped them win their freedom.
Thank you so much. I always love that story of Anthony because he was 19 years old. And we have two stories of young men from Montpelier, Anthony being one of them, and another young man named Ezekiel, who is also 19 years old. And it just always reminds me of the power of a young man determined. And so often we roll our eyes at teenagers, but really what brave individuals they often are and were back then in particular. Alexis, same question to you.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel, Mary. I'm excited to be here. Well, it's kind of one story, but I guess maybe it's one overarching theme with a couple of stories kind of umbrellaed underneath it. that immediately comes to mind. But for Charles Friend, his daughter describes him as a kind master who never sold any enslaved people. However, that is untrue. But what I find even more interesting about this concept is that several times people have been requested to be sold from him. And so in one instance that I like to kind of talk about is that there were 12 enslaved people, 11 men and 1 woman, who after 2 weeks of being stripped from their rations because he believed someone had stolen a pig, they went to the manor house and requested to be sold. Charles Friend says after, well, sleep on it, think about it, and come back the next day if you feel as though you still want to be sold. The next day, all 12 individuals come back and they're sold south to Alabama that day. And so this is not the first time of requests, and potentially I will find more stories of this, but there's also the story of Alec. Alec is particularly interesting because between the years of 1851 and 1856, he escaped 7 times. On his last escape, he is found in a Richmond jail where Charles Friend goes to retrieve him and he requests to be sold. So Charles Friend leaves him there at that jail. The last story that I know of right now is the story of Molly. Molly escaped from White Hill Plantation. She was captured in downtown Petersburg. Oddly enough, she was captured across the way from Charles Friend's city home. That's where the jail was located. He's called to retrieve her. She then says, no, I don't want to go. And he leaves her there at that jail. However, 6 months later, she returns to White Hill Plantation, very visibly pregnant and about to give birth. And Charles Friend says that she is too far gone pregnant for punishment, and that it would have to wait for later. But I do, with these stories, I think it's always interesting to think about not just the escape, but also the vocalization of people who do not want to be here and asserting their agency in doing that. And saying, I don't want to be in this place. And particularly with Molly, I find it interesting because I'm sure she knew that she was pregnant at that time. And the kind of the bravery in that of, I always say that healthcare on the plantation is way better than it would be at the jail, as you have midwives there who were experienced in helping women through the birthing process. So what does it mean in that sense that she, vocalizes, I do not want to go with you. I know that I'm in a particular situation that you may not know that I'm in. And so those are the stories that recently have been catching my eye, are those of folks who are vocalizing their want not to be there, escaping and succeeding, essentially, in not having Charles Friend force them to come back with him.
I think that's really amazing and sort of gives us really a window into the mindset of both the enslaved and the enslavers, this idea of that willingness to go for it 7 times, but also this idea of, oh, you're going to come back to me. You're going to regret these choices, I think is really interesting. Jennifer, what about you? Stories of folks seeking their freedom.
Right. So, Germanna, I've kind of wanted to focus on the sites that people who are associated with the sites that Germanna manages. And so we have an archaeological site that kind of covers a lot of time. And so it was a little bit difficult for me to kind of select. So I kind of wanted to talk about a couple of different people that lead into each other. So the Germanna site, it starts with Spotswood, and in around 1720 there's a structure called the Enchanted Castle, and the Spotsylvania Courthouse is just about 300 feet away. And there's a couple of depositions in the county court record that talk about a woman named Katina who shows up in Alexander Spotswood's probate inventory as being enslaved. And she is mentioned in a deposition having a messenger come and attempt to meet with her. It doesn't end up working out. He doesn't meet with her. But the interesting thing is that for about a decade, Spotswood is not at the Enchanted Castle at all, and there doesn't seem to be anyone there. And so it is interesting kind of to postulate what the lives of the people who were enslaved at that space would have been doing, really kind of operating the household on their own. And so as we're sort of doing archaeology and we're discovering things like food and other kinds of things in the archaeology, we recognize that is from the people who were enslaved at the time. So the Enchanted Castle, it runs its course, and in the late 18th and early 19th century, there are several people who are enslaved at the Gordon Plantation, including one man who's named Thomas Bailey, and he's a blacksmith, and he does self-emancipate. And so we have the opportunity to kind of follow his journey. It seems that by 1800, he is back at the Gordon Plantation, but he is there along with a woman named Edie and Grace. And so in 1852, there is a will from Elizabeth Gordon that says that upon her death, the people who were enslaved at the Gordon Plantation would be emancipated. And so by 1853, we have the names of 36 people: Isabella, William, Cyrus, Jupiter, Peter, Martha, Little Grace, Louisa, James, Churchill, Henry, Lucy, Mary, Mary Jane, Lucy Ann, William Gordon, George, and Edie Gordon, that range from 50 years to 1 month old, who set sail on the Banshee to Liberia as part of the Colonization Society. And so we see the names Edie and Grace from 1800 that are still listed when they are departing on the Banshee. And so there's a lot of continual stories that we have, but we're really kind of at the very beginning of discovering what happened to them after that time. And so a lot more research to be done.
I think this is all really exciting. And one of the things that I've really appreciated that each one of you has done is said the names of these people. And I think so often when we're talking about the history of enslaved people, we don't say their names. We don't say their first names and their last names, and they don't get told and celebrated as the names of the likes of a James Madison or a Thomas Jefferson. So I think this is really powerful that we can hold on to these names and think about whether it's an Anthony or an Edie or Grace or any of these folks as we go through this conversation. So one of the things that I think is really interesting here too is each of you has a different approach to understanding the past and understanding these local histories. So could you talk a little bit about, Jennifer, you just said you're at the beginning of this. What are the challenges of doing this kind of work? And then also, what are the rewards? And because I just called your name, Jennifer, I'm going to go to you first. What are the challenges and one of the rewards?
Well, I mean, some of the challenges is we are really at the beginning of finding more information about each of these individual people, and there's our goal is to be able to assist with helping people find their ancestors. And so, we want to make sure that this information is as public as possible. And I mean, at this moment in time, we're just starting to reach out to descendants communities to find out if there are any connections, doing all of the research that we can. So that's having had experience with this in the past, I know what ends up happening is quickly we go from the point where, you know, we're looking for connections to the point where we're trying to find the time to connect with everybody and make sure that we're continuing to stay connected. And that's always the spot that I've ended up in is, wait, I actually have to do other work rather than just connecting with people. But it's the most important part. It's why we do what we do. So that's where we are right now.
Absolutely. Alexis, what are the challenges and the rewards? And I think particularly doing this kind of community-based archaeology and community into this sort of research.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that I think is particularly hard is wanting to talk about enslavement with other Black people, and realizing that it is a kind of a balancing act. And so I always acknowledge to people when I have public meetings is that day in and day out, I am studying a very challenging history. I work at a Civil War park. I sometimes engage with visitors who are not kind. I, receive comments that or I overhear things that are also not kind to other visitors who may be at the park. And that I know that I work in a place that is filled with a lot of charged emotions and feelings for people who are entering that space, particularly if you're unfamiliar with the city of Petersburg. The city of Petersburg is about 86% Black. And there is not a lot of, I will say that the Black population that currently lives in the city does not frequent the park. But I'm well aware from talking with the local community that part of that is because it feels as though it's a space that they are not supposed to be in. And so it's kind of bridging that connection of, I understand how you're feeling, but I do think that talking about these aspects of the past do have a connection to the present. And I find that to be really important to say, and always say, it's like, I understand that there are things that that are painful for you to hear, and it may seem as though that I am brushing off, I am reading the documents day in, day out. I have kind of a different skin that's built up to deal with these things, and acknowledging that when I'm having community meetings. The reward of it all, on the other side of it, then maybe it's kind of a personal thing for me, but I do think it is also, it is impactful for the communities that I work with. As a Black woman archaeologist and just a Black person generally, hearing positive feedback from my Black elders is very encouraging to me. It makes me feel like the work that I'm doing really does matter. Making them proud makes me feel proud. And the comments that I get back, like when I go to community meetings, is like, wow, this really touched me, or I'm really happy that you're doing this, even if it's a meeting that has 10 people in it, right? If all 10 of those people are engaged and excited, and are sharing stories, and feel free in the places that they're sharing these stories, and say that they don't feel as though they had a venue to do this, that in itself, I always say, is like, I've won today. Like 10 people came to this meeting, we got in a circle and we talked. I learned stories about the place that I live in. And I'm able to then show connections of, oh, well, that's really interesting, because like you said, oh, well, that connects to Molly, or, there's an enslaved person who had an experience that I think the outfall of this is what's happening in the present. That is a really powerful thing right there. And I think it's one of the best rewards, because this work can be challenging, and sometimes you will feel like you don't want to do it anymore. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. What about you, Bruce? What are the biggest challenges and what are the biggest rewards of doing sort of this local community history?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenge is the fact that there's not much written history. And also in this area of Virginia, there was not much Black history that was taught in the school system. So a lot of people really don't really understand their entire history. And I think that it's a challenge because a lot of people are embarrassed about that history. I think the biggest reward is that when you do get the story, or when you reveal certain aspects of that history, and to be able to tell it and to be able to connect the community, I think that that is the greatest award.
Absolutely. Anaya, same question to you, challenges and rewards.
Yeah, I think just to echo what has already been said, especially by Jennifer and Alexis, is that connecting with people is always, for me, the most rewarding aspect of this work. Yeah, I came to the dissertation topic that I'm approaching through the Monticello community, through the descendants that I was working with at Getting Word. And so having an opportunity to connect with them and hear their stories, but also to expand upon what is known and understood about their families and their contribution to American history, I think is rewarding beyond any other benefit of doing this work. I would say, though, that also comes with challenges, right? It's hard to define who is part of a community, right? And I think sometimes when we're working with sources, when we're looking at the archive, our work can sometimes unintentionally reproduce divisions and social hierarchies and, any sort of disagreement between people can be reproduced in the work just by following records closely. And so I think the challenge in getting intimately familiar with these families and their communities is also, something that pushes me to think beyond the confines of traditional historiography and the narratives that we agree upon about the past, right? So I think the oral history work and the community work offers an opportunity to embrace different voices, to call attention to the ways that history is produced, right? So like asking different questions, looking different places for information about the enslaved, and trying to look through and beyond our own prejudices to the material, I think are some of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And between Jennifer and Alexis both mentioned archaeological work. Naya, you're mentioning oral histories. And as Bruce mentioned, there's not a lot in the written record. So looking in these different sources of information and finding that history out, I think is incredibly valuable and allows us to catch all those details about, I think, the everyday life. And one of the things that makes me think of is you all told extraordinary stories of people working towards their freedom, but often working towards freedom was part of an everyday thing. It wasn't just running away from slavery or self-emancipating, self-liberating. And as we talk about Juneteenth, we want to think about, the fight for freedom that didn't just happen in the 1860s, but all of the work that happened before that, but also the work that has happened since then. So would any of you like to share sort of your idea of what freedom looks like and how that connects through time? I'm going to go to you, Bruce. What does freedom look like to you and how does that connect?
Well, it's a broad question. Freedom means to me the ability to live within a society and feel free in that society to be who you are. The ability to participate in the socioeconomic system that have been ignored, and to certain groups. In other words, they've been marginalized. And because of that, the issues and so forth that have plagued, especially the African-American community, is a result of a system, that marginalizes certain groups. So I think that freedom, to me, is the ability to be a part of the society and get all of the benefits of the people within that community.
Excellent. Jennifer, what does freedom look like to you?
I don't know that I actually have a really good answer. I feel like the idea of, I feel like I would probably just be a really big downer. I mean, I don't know that. I think freedom is one of those ethereal words that we say, and we don't really grasp what it is. I mean, not specifically what freedom would mean to me, but if we're trying to work towards something, I think really Bruce said it. It's the ability to live your life and to not be oppressed by who you are. It's to have kind of this social contract that says that who you are as a person, where you are in society, all of your physical attributes, your mental attributes are not going to in any way cause oppression to you. That's kind of a utopic vision. So let's hope we can get there someday.
Amazing. What about you, Alexis? What does freedom look like to you?
It is very, I think I'm with Jennifer that words mean things. And I think that it is a hard word to define. I guess more so it triggers me to think about a particular story. And so in my mind, I think about 3 enslaved men at Petersburg who were able to be hired out to build earthworks in Williamsburg and Yorktown. And I think in this instance, when they get back to White Hill Plantation, when the political climate in Petersburg and the war is starting to inch closer, they escape and join the military. So 2 men join the Army and 1 joins the Navy. And when I think of this story and its connection to freedom, I think about how your eyes can be open to freedom and different opportunities. And I think the opportunity is them being able to expand where they are, meeting different either free Black people who are building earthworks and being paid for it, or other enslaved people who are being rented out to build these earthworks, and how freedom is not necessarily like I don't think it's an all the time thing. I don't think it's I think there are many ways in which some of us on the call right now may not feel free. So I don't think it's just like, I think it's very romanticized in the way that we think about it, but I think it's the freedom in that sense of that story is when you see an opportunity or gain knowledge and utilize it differently to change your path. And I think that everyone does not have that option or do not get those opportunities that may change their path or spark an idea. However, those men, I always say this is like, to think that you may one day meet someone, it's one of those things like you may meet someone who may change your life or spark an idea that grows. And so just the freedom of utilizing that knowledge to make a decision.
Yeah. Let us all hope that we're that spark for someone. That's the dream. Naya, what does freedom look like to you?
Yeah, I think it is this elusive term that we're always seeking. And I think each person has a different meaning of freedom, which is why this question is, what does freedom mean to you? But I think for me in doing this work, what I've sought out in stories of the enslaved communities are ways that they've sought their own freedom. And so I guess for me, I have come to see it as the things that these enslaved people fought for. So whether that's Tucker Isaacs and Peter Fawcett becoming conductors on the Underground, leaving the Monticello plantation, forging free passes for others to have their freedom of movement, their freedom to choose who their families are, their freedom to worship any spiritual belief that they choose, their freedom to occupy space the way that they would want to, their relationship to the environment and to other species. I think there's just such a broad lens and a broad way that we can look at freedom. But I have found that for me, I always take inspiration for the things that these people sought out very specifically. So whether that's literacy, education, land, all of the things that I just listed.
I think that really highlights that, again, you know, we celebrate Juneteenth because that was a day a proclamation was read out in Galveston, Texas, saying people were free. But what I'm hearing you say is that it's so big and it's so multifaceted that seeking, whether it's through the people you meet, the education you get, the ability to have that financial freedom, that security, that safety, all of that, it's a work in progress, and we're still working towards it today. And I think that's really important when we talk about these pasts, that it may seem like a really long time ago, connecting to the stories of the folks that you all have shared today. But there's a straight through line to where we are today from those things that happened in the past. I want to talk a little bit more about the work you all do with communities. So much of the work that you all do to uncover these histories that are often, you know, as Alexis mentioned, often difficult for people to talk about. Can you talk a little bit about how working with communities to tell these stories has either changed over time or changed through your involvement with it? And I'm going to go to you first, Naya, because you spoke last.
Way to put me on the spot. Yeah, I think in all of the ways that I've been working with different communities, whether they were descendants of the enslaved community at Monticello, whether they are descendants of people who created free Black settlements after the age of emancipation, right? So those 1865 to like 1920s communities, and looking at residents there and their descendants, I think what has stood out is that communities are never isolated in space or time, that at any given moment, the people that I'm working with have connections to either earlier members of that community, or different relationships to the land at various points in time, or different connections to other places. And that those that collection of experiences is what defines their time in a space like Monticello, or in the free towns of rural Virginia. I'm thinking, you know, about Geetown and Scuffletown, which are two of the freedom colonies where my ancestors lived and worked, right? Both in Orange County and Albemarle County. I think the work has shifted because now I understand these people to be part of an ongoing process, as opposed to a specific moment in time. And that's helpful because I think we have a tendency to talk about slavery like it was forever ago, or Jim Crow like that was forever ago, right? When in reality, it's like my grandparents experienced those things, my parents experienced those things. I am still experiencing many of the things that they were fighting against, right? And so I think that has just become really clear to me in the work, that we're not really dealing with questions about a past and a present, that we're really dealing with questions about just change over time and what the future looks like, right? And if we think of it that way, then we might feel called to do something different, right? If we understand how we got to this place, and we understand that maybe the place that we're in is not the best, then how do we make it more free? How do we make it more equitable? How do we make it more just for as many people as possible? It asks us to do something for the future.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. Bruce, how has your work with community history changed through time?
Well, I think that what it does, it helps to preserve the heritage of the community, to be able to document stories and events that has happened in the past that has made this community what it is. It's also giving context to the community. In other words, why is it in the state that it is in today? History kind of guides you and give you some understanding of the condition of the community. Also, it's given a chance for marginalized voices to speak. People that have not historically had a chance to talk about their history and their experiences. Also, I think that it gives the community a sense of pride, especially when you focus on the achievements, and the excellence of people within that community, whether it be architecture, whether it be the arts, whether it be sports, all of those excellences counters the negatives. And I think that also it strengthens the bonding of that community. And for many other reasons, but that's what I think that the local history here in Orange does. And we're not finished yet. Okay, there's a lot more to do, but there is progress.
There's definitely a lot more to do. Alexis, same to you. How's your work with communities changed and been significant?
Yes, I think I will say for our Enslaved Field Laborers project, we set out with a goal to create a descendant group. And I will say that we were heavily encouraged by the Montpelier rubric. But I think part of that is that we did, the activity of like, where are we at right now? Let's go through the rubric and check off all the boxes of what we've done. And what I realized was, one, as a federal agency, we have our own hoops to jump through and own kind of bureaucratic stuff that doesn't really actually fit into the rubric. And so some of that was actually me being like, hey, maybe we need to put a pause on creating a descendant community, and so we can actually give answers to what we can actually do concretely, and what formats we are able to provide for interaction and interpretation and involvement on a formalized level. I think for us as a park, we get really excited sometimes with the idea of, oh, we can engage people and this is the way to do it. And, we step forward into this thing that we've never done before, full speed. And so one of the steps that we've taken kind of back that I've kind of asked everyone to think about is maybe we're not necessarily seeking a descendant community yet. And that what we're doing is actually building trust. Because I was like, and I think that our situation is definitely different than Montpelier's and what is going on in Orange. And some of the connections and historical stuff that has already exists there in the sense that descendant community work can be a lot. And what we initially will go in asking people to do on top of maybe being retired and enjoying your life, or having a job and struggling to balance enjoying your life and doing different things. And then on top of that, as I talked about before, there is some distrust in the historical community that exists here with the Black community. And so I've just taken the approach of, how about we work with those who are consistently coming to meetings to just gain trust, to show that we are involved and engaged, and that we mean what we say, and that we can develop a product that everyone is excited about, or products that people are excited about, and see if that conversation actually organically involves, instead of imposing the idea of, let's be a descendant community. Because I think that we can be overzealous in wanting to do that. And that may not even be an approach that the community is even interested in. Not that they're not interested in doing the work, but maybe being a formalized group is not the organization that they'd like.
Absolutely. I think that's really important, is not to decide for the community what the community wants, but listen to actually what they're saying. That's one of the biggest ones, and probably one of the biggest challenges. Jennifer, how has this work changed through time for you?
Yeah, well, so I've been working specifically with historic sites, for about 15 years now. And when I first came into the field, there was a really big movement to say, how do you know what we know? You prove it or you don't say it, right? And so going through, for example, a historic house, and it would be the family story says that this belonged to so and so. And there was a big movement to be like, well, you can't say that. We don't know it. It's not. We can't prove it. And something that I've found working with descendant groups, specifically in African American stories, because like Bruce said, there's not that much written. When you hear a family story and you're fortunate enough to be invited to know this story in the first place, and you hear a story about a woman and her child who supposedly slept in a particular room. There's no proof on that, but that's what the oral history says, and that you can qualify it, but it needs to be included because it's very significant. And so I think that one of the biggest changes that have happened over time is the re-inclusion of the importance of those oral histories.
I think that's really important too, because we assume because something's written down that it's true, but people can lie when they write just as much as they could lie when they're speaking or misremember or misquote. And sometimes we forget that. And I think that's so important. There's some really great questions in the chat, and I want to just kind of put them out there to the panelists. Alexis mentioned building trust, and Diane Gibson in the chat asks of the other presenters, how do you build trust through your work? So I'll put that out if anybody wants to speak to it. How are you working to build trust?
I'll jump in. So Monticello has been working with the descendant community for 30 years now. This weekend, tomorrow and Saturday, we'll actually celebrate 30 years of the Getting Word Project. So this is a bit of a cop-out, right? I'm going to say that I was tasked with maintaining relationships as opposed to building trust, but I recognize the work that went into building that trust is showing up and being consistent. I think so many places who look to get engaged with descendant community work in particular have an idea that they can do it for a short amount of time and then disconnect, right? That they can collect oral histories for the period of a grant and then leave. And that's not the case. Once you begin working with communities, you're kind of stuck. You're plugged in for life because it's a disservice to come into these communities, to take their stories and to use them in a museum context, at least, to benefit from. And so the first way that Monticello has built trust is sustaining this engagement for 30 years. I think that is a tremendous accomplishment. And the second way we've built trust is to be transparent about the goals, about our capacity. So not over-promising to the Senate communities. One of the things with the Montpelier rubric, which thank you for putting that in the chat, Mr. Bruce, and for mentioning it, Alexis. Like one of the things it talks about is bringing in descendant communities into leadership roles. Well, not every site is capable of doing that for a variety of reasons. First of all, you don't want to integrate a burning house. And so where there are troubles in the institution, you want to fix those things first. And so I think for Monticello, it's also been about managing expectations. To say that, aspirationally, we hope to have descendants at a leadership level and in a governance positions on the board, but also recognizing that there is a lot of work that needs to go into the organization first before we can open that door without causing harm. So I think those are the two biggest things, just trying not to cause harm or further harm to communities by being inconsistent and also not over-promising in those relationships.
I think that's really important, and you allude to is you have to have investment in an organization at all levels. So if the leadership isn't invested, then the work of people on the lower levels can be swept up or taken away or reprioritized, and building that institutionally is really important. There's another really great question in the chat that I wanted to throw out to you all from Alicia. She asks, do you ever disagree with your communities or with the communities you work with? And if so, how does that complicate things? So what happens when you don't agree with them? And then I'm also going to add to this, what happens when they don't agree with each other, with themselves? Because communities are made up with a bunch of different individuals with different ideas and opinions. So what's your approach to that?
I will share something that happened recently at a meeting. We had a community meeting. It was to just have people share stories about things that they thought were important. And one of the things came up is that someone had talked about a historical document that has been debunked and is not true. So historians in the room knew that this was not a true document. However, at least one of the people that we had in the room who was facilitating was like visibly, you could tell that they were just like, what, you know, kind of like, this isn't true. How could this person? And I remember having to pull them to the side and say, you know, were you listening though? Like before the initial thing maybe have thrown you off, I said, what was attractive to this person? Because I said, the document that they're talking about is not necessarily untrue unto the things that it's saying. And we can actually just provide them potentially with a citation that is true. I was like, but it does actually, to critique people or I always say gently correct people, it does take trust to do that. And I think that that's very important as well, because we all have misinformation that we have said to someone else, shared with other people, and learned from. And so I think that to be able to gently correct people, you have to have trust and build that sense of community there. But also we're here to listen. Because I said, what I was really interested in that conversation was what he was saying about why he was connecting to that document, because but his connection was still very valid despite the document being false. And so I was like, active listening is very important when we're in these spaces, to really understand what people are saying. Because if you're only going to be superficial, you will miss a lot of information there. And so that's part of, you know, it's disagreeing. Yes, you know, it's a person disagreeing with the community, but also us being able to disagree within our own, you know, the facilitator world with each other. That happens as well. All of us who are in the room facilitating also don't agree. And that causes a different level of just work that needs to happen in that space.
Thank you so much. I think that's all really important. Bruce or Jennifer, do you, what happens when you don't agree with the community or the community doesn't agree with itself?
Well, I've never run across that situation, but I think that trust is important. I think that when you can convince the community that the more we know about one another, as far as groups and societies, the better off we are, the more understanding we have of each other. And that's why I'm very proud that the Orange County African American Historical Society have friends in all of the communities of Orange. We are a diverse organization, and it seems as though each segment of the Orange community is there to help and to aid us in any way that they can. And I think that that's the way to build trust, is to build trust not only within the African American community, but within the community at large.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jennifer.
That was beautiful, Bruce. Thank you for saying that. So this has happened I've had this experience working with community groups in the past, and one of the ways that I've kind of officially been able to kind of move along the dynamic of groups that tend to sometimes not like each other is to develop kind of a policies and procedures with each individual group. And that way you can work with the group separately and not really be a facilitator for the interdynamics of different groups, but just kind of work with individual groups separately and make sure that as a whole everybody is really up front and understands what the goals of whatever situation it is come forward.
Amazing. Thank you. I think so much of what we've talked about here has to do with that relationship building. And I think it's really interesting when we're talking about subjects, and particularly these ideas of freedom and slavery, and those difficult components of our history, often the parts people don't want to talk about. Building that trust, building those relationships, not only helps us understand the past better, but helps our communities together function today. We have a few minutes left, but I wanted to have each of our panelists offer a thought or an idea they wanted everyone to leave here with today. So maybe a thought looking to the future, a thought, a major lesson learned from the past, or just something that you really want folks to ruminate on as they leave here this evening. So let you guys think for a minute. Bruce, you're smiling big, so that means I'm going to call on you first.
Well, what I would like for this audience to know is that the African-American community is a community that has a legacy of resilience. I want them to know that the fight for freedom continues. I think that the community solidarity within the community is important. Education and awareness is important. And again, I think that we need to celebrate Black excellence and achievement. And most importantly, I think that there is really a lot of power in activism and using your voice.
Amazing, thank you. Alexis, what do you want people to leave here with this evening?
I guess I have two thoughts. One harkens back to a story. I'm a story girl. And it's more about Alec, but realizing that freedom also happened for some enslaved people, or the want for freedom or happened instantaneously. And so for Alec, a lot of times his runaways were after extreme abuse. And so you would see that in the record, he may have, received a punishment, and the next morning in Charles Friend's diary, he has said, Alec has run off from the plantation. I mean, it is immediate. And I think about, I really enjoy hearing that, and that it's instantaneous. Like I interpret it as like fed upness immediately, of like, I am gone, I am leaving. There's something about that is just very personally relatable to me, maybe because that's, it's like, it's just that for personality, a lot of times you don't get that personality. You have to read between the lines to get those things within records. And so that is something that I really just relate to. And then in addition to that, just be creative in getting people into history. One of the things I'm really excited about is that I have a youth archaeology program that is going to be working on the Enslaved Field Laborers Project beginning next week. It is the same program that got me to where I am today. It's the same program where I met Mary. She was my boss and my mentor. And I'm really excited because we're working with a local Black woman artist, eBay Crawley, and she is going to help the participants make books. She does bookmaking of historical figures, or not necessarily, well, I think they're historical figures. They may not be well known, but they are still historical figures in my book, of people that she reads in history. And so the participants will learn how to make their own books about people or incidents or topics from the Enslaved Field Laborers Project. They're going to learn they're going to make a clothing line of of clothes that have stories and themes on that. I'm really excited about the intermeshing of creativity, and also them being able to use their hands and really like dig into history in a different way. That's not just, reading the book and the work that I do on a regular basis, reading the book and maybe digging in the dirt, but how do we transfer that into a product? I'm really, really excited about that. So to just, think creatively about how to engage people with this history.
I love that. It makes me so happy that this program's happening. Jennifer, what's one thing you want people to leave with today?
Sure. So, as I've mentioned a couple of times, Germanna is really just at the beginning of uncovering and talking about and finding out more about the African American history at all of these sites. But one of the things that we recognize is that it's African American history, Black history is so much bigger, especially if we're talking about like one site. It's not the site, it's the community around the site. It's people who pass across the bridge every day on to work. It's where the post office is, it's where the train station is. And so, the community that is around Germanna or any of the other historic sites is so much more than the actual place. It's a full community and generations as far back as there were people, and all the way up until today, and it's still part of that Germanna community and that Germanna history. And I think it's like that for everywhere that all of our viewers are located at. And so you don't need this significant historic site where all of the history is supposed to reside. It's so much bigger than that, and it is a community. So that's what I want everybody to take away, is that history is a part of the larger community.
Thank you. All right, Naya, bring us home. What do you want people to take away tonight?
I think just building upon what everyone has already said, right? I think what I want everyone to leave this call with tonight, especially in the sort of charged social and political climate that we're in, where people feel like disagreeing is a bad thing, where people find discomfort to be something they're not willing to work through. My encouragement for everyone on this call is to lean into things that make you uncomfortable, especially about your local history. I think in an era where everyone feels like they're being lied to about the past, and where history is being attacked in our classrooms and on school field trips, right? We really have to push beyond those things. And so I think the way to get beyond that is for everyone to get involved in local history. I think local history is so tremendously important. It offers everyone an opportunity to get involved in some aspect or another. So I encourage everyone on here to visit historic sites, to attend programs like this one, to volunteer. Please volunteer. Again, please volunteer. Like all of our organizations need help. And to share resources. If you have family photo albums, if you know stories about your community that are not represented somewhere, if you have oral histories that have been passed down about your neighborhood or your community, share them somewhere, record them somewhere, put them on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. There's so many different ways for people to create content. So my plea for everyone on this call is just to get involved.
Thank you. That's absolutely true. We need every single person on this call to get involved. The other thing we need you all to do is come to Orange this weekend. We are going to be celebrating Juneteenth in person all day on Saturday, the 17th at Montpelier. We will be out there. There will be music, there will be food, there will be ice cream, there will be vendors, there will be community organizations. We have more vendors and community organizations than we've ever had at a celebration before. So much we had to order extra tables. I was really excited to see. We'll have all sorts of special tours, and it will be open for free to everyone. So come out Saturday, and you'll get a nice break for Father's Day on Sunday, and then come back on Monday. We are going to be in downtown Orange at Church Street Park, which is at the corner of Church and Chapman Streets in Orange. And it's the location where the Orange County African American Historical Society worked with the town of Orange last year to install a commemorative park commemorating the history of an African American community centered in that area of the town of Orange. So we're going to have live music and food there as well. We're going to have poetry. We're going to have amazing performances from 11 to 2 on Monday, and it will also be free. And there will be a bounce house, so bring your little ones. And so I really hope that you all get excited, that you've enjoyed tonight's presentation. For those of you who live quite a ways away, which I know some of the folks on this call do, Join us again next week, same time at 7 p.m. next Thursday. We're going to have the next discussion in our series, and it's going to be stories from the congregation, really focusing on the role of Black churches in helping secure freedom for their members and for their communities. And then our final program will be the last week of June, the last Thursday of June, and that's going to be stories in our arts. So really leaning into what Alexis was talking about. How do we see freedom being expressed through poetry, visual arts, performance arts, and how are we dealing with that today? So we're really excited for those programs. So please come back. This has been recorded, so I'll be sending it out, and they will get posted on the Orange County African American Historical Society's YouTube, and then from there we'll get put up on our webpage. So thank you again, everyone, for spending the evening with us, and thank you particularly to our panelists, Naya, Jennifer, Alexis, Bruce. You all were fantastic, and I think you left us with a lot to think about. So thank you so much. Also, Naya and Alexis, you got called role models. So
Wow.
take that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.